What if I told you that with a piece of acetate and some simple tools you already have in your card making stash, you could stamp cards that look professionally done every single time? In this video, I'm sharing my top 9 stamping hacks for mirrored images, perfectly aligned and crisp sentiments, vibrant inks on dark cardstock, all in a few simple steps. Hack numbers 1, 4, and 10 will change your stamping game forever. So let's dive in. So here I have a bird that faces this direction, but let's pretend that for some weird reason I wanted to face the other way. With a MISTI and a few clever hacks, you can absolutely make it work, and here's how to do it. I usually use a sticky mat with my MISTI, but I won't need it for this technique. What I do need is a clean and damage-free sheet of acetate. I'm using one from Salmon Says Stamp. It's excellent quality and heat resistant, so I can reuse it later. So it's not going to go waste. Now, since the acetate is clear and I'm using black ink on the black MISTI background, the stamped image would be very hard to see. To fix that, I'll slide a scrap piece of white copy paper underneath. I'm making sure everything is tucked tightly into the corner. That way, if I need to restamp, I won't have alignment issues, and these strong magnets will hold everything in place. Next, I'll use a piece of painter's tape to create a hinge mechanism for the card panel. Time to grab my bird stamp. Thinking about my overall composition, I might want some additional elements besides a sentiment. Before stamping, I want to ensure the acetate is clean and free of grease, and I'll clean it simply by spraying a little alcohol and wiping it down. The important part here is to remember to lift the card panel out of the way to reveal the acetate. Now I'll ink up the stamp and use my pressure tool to apply a tiny bit of pressure to transfer the ink evenly. Using too much pressure can cause the stamp to slip and slide on the acetate and create a blurry outline. The impression is fairly good, but I want it really nice and juicy so I can get a solid ink transfer. I'll stamp again, and now if the impressions don't line up, I know that at least I can wipe off the acetate and try again, but I can't wipe off my cardstock. This looks good. I'm going to immediately drop the hinged card panel over the inked image and allow it to sit for a few seconds so the ink can transfer. I have to be really careful while lifting the flap because it shouldn't shift, else I'll end up with smudges. So what I like to do is firmly hold down on one side of the panel and lift the opposite corner with my tweezers and then lift it right off in one go. That's an almost perfect stamp. You can see that it's a little bit lighter around the edges, and obviously the impression isn't quite as crisp since it's a transfer. I know it's a bit of a risk, but I'll retry this step again. I think that's the best we can do right now, and I'll show you how to make this look crisper. Let me clean this up and remove the acetate before any mishaps. Now I'll use my black Pigma Micron pen. This is the 005, which matches the thickness of the stamped outline. I'll use this to add a little more definition to the impression. I just made a bit of a boo-boo here. I've gone slightly off here so it doesn't look perfectly stamped anymore, but it does look a bit more hand-drawn, which I don't mind because this is, after all, handmade and not Hallmark. I do have a very detailed video on this mirror image technique for both stamps and die cuts, and I'll link to that video in the description below. I think it's important to talk about the 2 critical items for getting clear, clean, and crisp stamped impressions every time. One of them is the ink being used. This ink mentions ink for fine details, which means it's perfect for really crisp impressions no matter how intricate your design is. There are tons of different inks out there. This one is a pigment ink, and while there are many options, using a good quality ink makes a huge difference if you want clean, sharp results. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the drying time for inks play an essential role when using techniques like blending and heat embossing, but we won't go into those in this video. Another really critical item is a stamp positioning tool. I personally swear by my Misty for clean and crisp impressions, but any stamp positioning tool will work great because it not only helps with multiple stamping but also acts as a stable platform when mirror stamping. I'll keep referring to the Misty since that's what I have here, but it pretty much refers to any stamp positioning tool. And if you primarily use acrylic blocks, I'll show you how to get better impressions with those in the next hack. The challenge with using an acrylic block to stamp is that I have to be absolutely 100% sure I'll get a really good impression with just one press, right? Because I can't line it up again and stamp over it unless I'm extremely precise. Some people have that precision, but unfortunately I don't, and I end up with shadowing or ghosting. So that method just isn't for me, and the Misty was one of the very first tools I bought after my die cutting machine. This hack is really helpful if you're working with acrylic blocks instead of a stamp positioning tool. I do that often when I'm using small stamps or for background stamping. As you can see, I have a large stamp here. I'll ink it up, and I'm using an alcohol-proof ink here because I'll be coloring this later. A large design like this isn't a problem at all. It's very straightforward. But let's say I want to add these tiny musical notes. These are very small stamps. If I pick one up with a large acrylic block, you can immediately see the block rocks around. If I try to stamp like this, I might get ghosting, smudging, or uneven pressure. So here's the easiest way to stabilize this, and I picked up this hack from another crafter on YouTube, but unfortunately I can't seem to remember who it was. I'll move the small stamp towards the edge of the acrylic block so I can stabilize it by adding another stamp from the same stamp set. It's important that it's from the same set since the stamps are the same thickness. Now you can see that it is completely stable. I obviously won't ink up the second stamp because it's just there for support. Now, here's another important hack if you want really crisp impressions. This is a brand new stamp, so it still has residue from the manufacturing process. You can condition it by rubbing it with your finger, and you'll notice the surface becomes cloudy, which tells you the residue has been removed. The other option is to spritz it lightly with alcohol and wipe it down. Both methods work. Once the stamp is conditioned, you'll get a much better image, and it can be especially useful when you're using an acrylic block since you need to get a perfect image on the very first try. Now for the next hack, I'm using this layered stamp set from Altenew. This is a multi-layer stamp set, but I'll use only the outline and solid layers to create a very different look from how it's expected to be used. It comes with coordinating dies, but I won't be using them today, but you absolutely could in your project. I'm definitely using my Misty for this because I'll be stamping multiple times, and there's no way I'd get this straight without a stamp positioning tool. But I have watched other crafters using an acrylic block and get perfect results. But again, that's not for me. This is a really good reason to invest in a stamp positioning tool if you're like me, because it's a one-time investment that will help you become more productive and creative because it will help you stretch your supplies beyond their standard functions. I'm stamping on Nina's Solar White cardstock, which is very smooth, a bright white, and 110 pounds in weight. Everything is secured in the corner, and now I'm going to start with the outline stamp. I'm applying very light pressure because I want a clean, crisp line, and it looks beautiful. This is a single flower, of course, but I want to make it look fuller, not quite a bouquet, but I do want to add another flower to create more interest. To do that, I'll remove the stamp, and I'm going to mount the outline stamp onto an acrylic block now. I'm using this sticky note for masking, and I'll make sure I stamp over the area with the adhesive strip so it's easy to stick the mask to the card panel. I learned this hack from Jennifer McGuire, if I can recollect, and it's been a real time and frustration saver. I'm not looking for a perfect impression here because I'm only creating a mask. I need to fussy cut very close to the outline as it's important to cut right along the lines. If I leave too much space around it, the stamped impression will have gaps in the image and they'll be hard to fill in. I'll give it my best shot since my scissor skills are a little questionable. Let me finish the fussy cutting and I'll be right back. Now I've kept the adhesive band intact so I can stick it down. I'll line up the petals and place the mask onto the stamped flower so it's fully covered. I'll take the stamp again and make sure it's clean before placing it onto my card front to position it. I want the second flower to go about here. I'm applying very light pressure. It looks like the ink didn't transfer completely, so I'll do another round of inking. That's done, and now I can remove the mask and save it for future use. Although I tried my best, I do see a small gap here. I'm glad I didn't remove the stamp yet. I'll line it up again and ink just that small area. Next, I'll add the leaves using the same masking technique with the leaf outline stamp, so they look like they're coming from behind the flowers. There is a small mistake here, but it won't be too noticeable. With a little bit of creative masking, we turned a single flower into an arrangement. You should check your stash and see what stamps you have that could be masked or mirrored to put together some creative projects. Now, let me show you the next technique using this design. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to use all the layers for this project. I'm keeping this simple and using just the solid layer, but I'll show you how to still create interest and contrast with that single layer without needing to color with alcohol markers or watercolors. I'm lining this up with the flower center. You can see there are edge details on the stamp. There's the flower center and little notches that help with alignment. I'll make sure everything is back in the corner to keep everything positioned properly. Coloring with ink cubes can create harsh outlines, and I can also see some ink pooling on the surface. So I'll use a stippling motion with my brush and blend out the ink for a smoother transfer. And you can see that I got great coverage in a single application. Now I'll add one more layer with the lighter ink just to even things out. I'm also dabbing any little ink pools that are forming. I'm not sure why I'm getting this spot here, but the rest looks fine. I'll dab a bit more ink right here to dull it down, and once it dries, it should smooth out and look fine. I'll clean the stamp, bring the mask back, and work on the second flower. I'll start with the lighter color first so I don't contaminate my lighter ink pad with darker ink. This one is quite a bit darker, so again, I'll use my brush and stipple the ink to avoid harsh outlines. You'll often see the ink pooling on photopolymer stamps, which is very normal, so this is a great way to get rid of that. I do see a small gap here, so I'll shift the mask slightly inward on the next pass. This is why cutting close to the outline is so important. It's still not completely gone, so I'll keep the mask in place and use my brush to add a little color to cover it up. There we go. Now I have two flowers and they look beautiful. For the leaves, I'm using the solid layer only, not the shading layers. I'll line it up and use two shades of green. Because the leaf is very small, I'm applying ink directly with the brush. I'll start with the lighter green and dab it on first. The ink isn't transferring completely because of the layers, so I'll shift the mask just slightly so the stamp makes better contact with the card base. It's still bothering me a bit, but I'll take a break and clean this up before trying again. This time I'll pull the mask in just a tiny bit more. That worked much better. These inks do stain the stamps quite a bit, but that's normal. I'll try the lighter ink once more, and yes, that gives a much better impression even though there's a slight overlap outside the outline, but it looks cleaner. Pulling the mask in just a tiny bit made all the difference. Now you can see I've created an entire arrangement. I added leaves so they look like they're sitting behind the flowers. The last thing I'm going to do is add just a tiny bit of black detail so everything feels cohesive. I'll line it up, give it a very light press, and that's it. Now, I'll curl the mat back on itself to remove the panel gently instead of yanking on it because that prevents the panel from curling up. And look at that. Even though this is a layering stamp set, I chose to use it a little differently. There is a small area where the pink's showing through, but I think I can live with that. I was able to cover it slightly with the second ink layer so it doesn't look muddy. That was a bit of a miscalculation on my part, but the technique still works. So even with layering stamps, you have another option for creating a different look than what was intended. Last thing I'll do is add the included sentiment at the bottom and I'll have a finished card front. And that sentiment brings me to the next hack. Keep watching. To add the sentiment, I'll pick up the stamp as usual, and here's the genius hack I picked up from Gina K. I naturally want to make sure it's centered and straight and exactly where I want it. To do this, I'll use a scrap piece of acetate I always have handy. You can even use the packaging from your stamp set for this. It doesn't have to be perfectly scratch-free like the one I use for mirrored stamping. I'll place the acetate over the card front and ink up my sentiment, which I'll first stamp onto the acetate. This step lets me see exactly where the sentiment is going to land, and I can adjust it until it looks the way I want. Once I'm happy with the placement, I can clean the acetate and stamp the actual card front. Oh, that was a disaster. Just look at how strong these magnets are. Luckily, I didn't have my fingers in the way, which has happened in the past, and I had a pretty bad injury. So if you have these strong neodymium magnets, please be really careful. I wanted to keep this bit in so you can learn from my mistake. Separating these magnets can be tricky, so I'll set it aside for now and just get on with the stamping. Now the sentiment is straight, centered, and exactly where I want it. It's really useful to keep a spare sheet of acetate handy because it can be used in so many different ways. I'll show you another application in one of the next hacks, and you'll see how useful acetate can be. In this segment, let's talk about how to stamp multiple impressions in a straight line, and for that, I'll be using two different hacks. I'll use the solid shaped stamp, and I want to stamp 3 of them in a row. If I tried to do it freehand, it would be difficult to keep them in a straight line even when using the grid lines on the sticky mat in my MISTI. So I'll show you another method. I'll first use my grid mat to lay down a piece of low-tack painter's tape across the card panel to ensure it's straight. Once I have a straight line, I can remove the grid mat from behind because the stamps are too thick to use the MISTI with the grid mat inside. I can now place the stamps along the line and they'll stay in a perfectly straight line inside my MISTI. However, there's a small technicality I'll show you in just a bit that will ensure they're really perfectly straight. If I stamp directly onto darker cardstock using distress oxides, the colors will show up fairly well, but not reach their full potential. For example, these stamps create decent impressions, but once the ink dries, the fibers absorb the inks and the colors fade. Even using a bright color like Twisted Citron, it may not be vibrant enough. So here's the trick I learned from Jennifer McGuire to get vibrant colors on dark cardstock. Instead of stamping directly with the colored ink, I'll first stamp with a white pigment ink. The base white layer creates a barrier between the paper and the ink and prevents the distress oxide from getting completely absorbed and helps the lighter colors show up brighter. So continuing with the hack for lining up the stamps in a row. Now, here's the technical tip for straight line placement. The painter's tape serves as a stopper, and when I slide the stamp along the paper, I feel it stop when it hits the edge of the tape. And I'll repeat this each time I add another stamp to the design. Once I've stamped the white pigment ink, I'll let it dry slightly. Since it's a pigment ink, it takes a few extra minutes to dry compared to dye inks. I can use my heat tool lightly to speed up the process, and then I can stamp the colored ink over the white. You can see the difference. One layer directly on the card is muted, but over the white pigment, the color is more vibrant and clear. Now I can stamp one at a time, ensuring perfect alignment every time. I'll repeat the process, lightly heating between layers if necessary to set the pigment. By the way, this technique isn't just for geometric patterns, it can be used with any stamp arrangement. And now it's time for the big reveal. Look at how straight everything is, and the colors are so vibrant. These two techniques can really help stretch your creativity, especially on dark colored cardstock. Full disclosure here, I haven't tried dye inks with this technique since they're translucent inks and will get absorbed by the cardstock a lot more. Now for the next hack, I'll show you how to use the smaller stamps in your stamp sets because they can be challenging sometimes. The way I'll use them in this video is to create borders and focal points. I'm using the beautiful Bloom stamp set from Salmon Says Stamp. Here I'm reusing the back of a scrap card panel for a demonstration, but you can create this as a 2-for-1 and I'll show you what I mean in a bit. I'll use the sticky mat inside my MISTI to hold the card panel in place, but I'll be using an acrylic block for the stamping since I'll be stamping the images in a random fashion. First, I'll stick the panel down with a little temporary adhesive. This keeps everything stable without interfering with placement. I'll start stamping with the smaller stamps using the earlier trick of the balancing stamp for stability. I'll repeat this with additional florals and leaves, etc. to create a border on the card center. If anything lands incorrectly, I can clean it up later. Once I'm happy with the arrangement, I can remove the rectangular mask. You can see how the border looks lovely all around the panel, and this can also be used to place a strip sentiment across the middle to create a second card as the 2-for-1. I'll use birthday wishes from another Salmon Says stamp set as it fits nicely in this rectangle. This technique shows how you can combine masks and small stamps to create intricate borders and focal points on your card panels. This is cut off, so to make it look intentional, I'll stamp a leaf over it. I should have used a smaller stamp, so I'll switch to that and add something here. I think that's enough because I don't want to ruin what I already have. Since I stamped with pigment ink, ideally I shouldn't use alcohol markers because the outlines will bleed. But since I like living on the edge, I'll still try, but I'll be cautious. I have my Ohuhu markers here, and I'll use a flicking motion to color in the centers of some of the florals. And there we have it, a 2-for-1 piece that I can stick on a plain card. I could also use some dimensionals and stick this back onto the original panel if I wanted, matching it up perfectly. Or I could use this to create a separate card. This is bothering me a little since I should have added a little more to this corner, like a small stamp. I'll do that now to show you. I'll use this tiny stamp to fill in the gap. Although it didn't land perfectly, I'll leave it there so I don't ruin it. You can decide to fill it in as much or as little as you like so it looks balanced. Anywhere the lines look a little off, I can adjust with another small stamp. The next hack is one I think you'll love, especially if you enjoy using small sentiments on delicate cards, whether as sub-sentiments or main sentiments, because stamping on narrow labels and banners can get pretty tricky. There are 2 banner dies included with the Master Layouts 2 die set, and as you can see, I've kept the negative die cuts from the banners to use as templates when I created the stamping jig. So let me start with the smaller banner die. If I hold it up for you, you can see that it's going to be the perfect fit for this sentiment. I have 2 scrap pieces of cardstock that I'll use to cut out the banners, and then we'll move on to the stamping. I avoid wasting cardstock, using only what I need. I'll cut out 3 so I can demonstrate batch stamping with this hack. I recently purchased this lilac shimmer scout machine from Spellbinders when they were offering a Black Friday deal. I used the Sizzix Sidekick for a couple of years, but I started to notice that the pressure was no longer uniform and the dies weren't cutting through even after I had added shims. So I decided to get the Scout, and I'm glad I did because I'm absolutely loving it. I hope you've liked the hack so far, and please consider giving this video a like and subscribe for more tutorials because it goes a long way to support my channel and allows me to keep making more videos. A sticky mat is helpful but not essential, and you could use any stamp positioner for this hack. First, I'll stamp on the base so I can get the placement. Now I'll align and center the banner template perfectly around the stamp sentiment and secure the template with washi tape. I'll add a bit of temporary adhesive to my scrap paper so the banner sticks firmly without getting glue on it, which is especially helpful when batch creating. I'll use my acetate again to double check the alignment. Even if it's centered, it's worth verifying on an actual label before proceeding with the final stamping. It seems perfectly centered, and we are ready to stamp. I lift the banner out with my tweezers, stamp, and then repeat for the next two banners. This is how you can batch create sentiments that are perfectly centered and aligned. Now I have three beautiful sentiments ready to go. You can save your stamping jig to reuse later, although you'll need to realign everything every time you use it. Use a glue eraser to remove any residual glue if you use temporary adhesive to secure the pieces. This smaller label die is also perfect for the sentiment, and I'll repeat the process and show you how convenient this is. By the way, I have a comprehensive list of all available supplies on my blog that's linked in the description of this video. They're affiliate links, and while they won't cost you anything extra, it will definitely help out my channel if you use them to purchase anything today. So thank you if you decide to support me. For storage, I keep my spare sentiments and die cuts in this album with low-tack sticky sheets, which hold them in place without damaging the die cuts. And this makes it really easy to retrieve them for future projects. I also have a video with 5 more storage hacks that I think you'll like, and you can watch it here.